As we're starting this morning, we're going to be finishing up a series of lessons about the lies we tell ourselves. And so today is kind of the miscellaneous category. They are lies we tell ourselves about the way God's creation works, the way His world works that we live in, the rules for our existence on this planet. Lies we tell ourselves about who God is and about what we expect God to be and about what we expect our relationship with Him to be. And so we tell ourselves some lies about these things. And so we want to look at these as we conclude this subject. The first thing that we want to think about is that we often tell ourselves lies about who or what will save us. In particularly, we sometimes think that science or human inventions, human advancement, human knowledge increasing is going to somehow save us. You see sometimes, especially like science fiction shows, there are two different styles. There's the one where everything's a total disaster and everybody's suffering and it's horrible. But then there are the others where we've managed to create a utopia. We've got everything is perfect. It's a wonderful world. There's no more crime. There's no more mental illness. There's no more physical illness. Instead of things like dialysis and radiation treatment and chemotherapy, they just point a little scanner thing at you and go, okay, you're better now. And it's just like magic. And that idea, and then in some of these kinds of stories, we figured out how to live forever now. And this idea that somehow humans can advance through knowledge and science is actually just another word that means knowledge, but that somehow as human beings we can figure this out and that we can solve all of the problems. And in most of those kinds of futuristic stories where humanity's solved it, one of the things that's been gotten rid of is religion, because religion's a problem and these religious people are a problem. So we put that behind us and we don't believe in that superstition and nonsense anymore. And now we're enlightened and we're all better. And science has cured every ill. And knowledge has made the economy, which always goes up and down. But now it's perfect. And everything is wonderful. And that's nonsense. But it's a lie that people like. People will pay to watch a movie about something like that. They'll buy a book to read a story about something like that because they want things to be wonderful. The problem is that's not the way that wonderful things are going to happen. If things are going to get better, if the world we live in is going to get better, and if we're going to make things better for the human race, it's going to have to be done through God's knowledge, not through humanity's. We need to remember that people are not just physical bodies. We're not just animals. We're not just machines that are alive. We have souls. We are souls. We are not just a physical thing. And this, as souls, we belong to God. Ezekiel 18 and verse 4, Ezekiel says, for God, speaking for God here, God is speaking, behold, all souls are mine. The soul of the Father as well as the soul of the Son is mine. The soul who sins shall die. We're not going to fix it on our own. We're not going to solve the problems because the problems aren't what we think the problems are. We think the problems are poverty, and we think the problems are, people out of work, and we think the problems are pollution and all. We think these are the problems. But those aren't the problems. Those are the symptoms of the problems. And like if we go to the doctor and he only treats the symptoms and doesn't fix what's causing the symptoms, we're not going to get any better in the long run. In the same way, the world is not going to get any better as long as we think that the symptoms are the problem. The problem is not the jobless rate, it's not politics, it's not poverty, it's not any of these other things. The problem is sin. And until we fix that problem, and guess what? As human beings, we can't fix that problem, so things can't get better. So the only hope for the world for things to get better is not science, it's not human knowledge, it's Jesus. Acts 4 and verses 11 and 12. Peter says, "This Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders, which has become the cornerstone, and there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved." Not only is Jesus the answer to a better life in this world, Jesus is also the only answer for eternal life. He tells us that no one comes to the Father but by me. But in this life, if we want things to actually get better, no government or government program is going to fix it. We've been fighting a war on poverty since Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Has it gotten better? No, not really. Because that's not the problem. That's the symptom of the problem. And government is not going to be the solution to that problem. More often than not, government is the problem or part of the problem that's causing a lot of these things. And so in every area, the answer is not science, it's not mankind, it's not in us to direct our own way and figure it out. It's not this humanist concept that we'll pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we'll help ourselves. And the self-help book industry is millions of dollars of people getting self-help to fix these things when only Jesus can fix the real root of the problem. We need to remember that. And hand in hand with that is the second thing that we tell ourselves that's a lie, and that is that material prosperity is the cure-all. We think if we could just give people enough money, if we could just give people enough stuff, if everybody had a house, if everybody had a car, if everybody had a check for $1,000 coming in every month. Well, we've tried that the last 18 months where they're just sending people money. Is that making things better? Is everybody having a house and everybody having a car? Does that fix all their problems? Most of you have houses and cars. Does that solve all your problems? That's not the way it works. Material possessions don't solve all your problems. Now, does a car solve your problem of how to get to work? Yes. Does a house solve your problem of where to sleep at night? Yes. There are some things that helps. One saying was that money doesn't buy happiness, but it can buy you an aspirin when you have a headache. There are some things that material possessions and money can do and should do. But we make the mistake so many times of thinking that things are the answer. Maybe you've seen, it's not as popular as it used to be. There used to be a bumper sticker people would have on their cars or trucks or whatever. It'd say, whoever dies with the most toys wins. There was another one that was kind of pushback against that, said whoever dies with the most toys is still dead. It doesn't solve your problem. You can't take it with you. The old adage, you never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer. Although I did see a picture of that last year. Somebody posted on Facebook a picture of a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer. But that's not the norm, right? And what are you going to do? I mean, the pharaohs of Egypt had all of these things buried with gold and jewels and all these things buried in their tombs with them. Sometimes even in some of these cultures, even their slaves or servants would be buried with them when they died so that they'd be there in the afterlife or whatever. You can't take it with you, though. It doesn't work. And the story is told about the one guy who tried to get it to work and made it work. He had a big case of gold buried with him. He got up to the pearly gates, and Peter said, "You can't bring that in here." "Oh, yeah, I've got to have it." "Well, what is it?" Opened it up, all these bars of gold. Peter says, "What do you want to bring paving stones with you?" It's just ridiculous for us to think that material things are the answer, or that they're going to cure things. The rich fool in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 21, learned that the hard way. He tore down his barns, or was going to tear down his barns to build bigger barns. He didn't get the chance because God said, "You're a fool, and tonight your soul is required of you." 1 Timothy 6, verses 9 through 12, Paul tells Timothy to warn those people who are rich because there are a lot of dangers associated with wealth. Yes, there are some things that wealth can do, and it can help some things, and it's a tool that can be used for good. It's also a tool that can be used for evil, but it's just a tool, just like a hammer, just like a gun, just like a car. It's a tool. It can be used for good or evil. It's up to the person using it, what they do with it. But Paul warned Timothy, those that desire to be rich fall into a snare. And he warns them to tell the rich not to trust in the riches. And yet we live in a society that thinks and puts up there that wealth and material possessions is the ultimate goal in life. But Jesus says, what profit is it if you gain the whole world and you lose your soul? I mean, if you had it all, it wouldn't solve the problems that you're still facing. There are incurable diseases that it doesn't matter how much money you pour at them, you can't make them go away. There are tragedies that it doesn't matter how much money or how many possessions you pour at them, it doesn't bring that person back. There are many things that money can do and possessions can do. There are many things that it cannot, and there are many times where it even becomes the problem because it's so much the focus of being. When I was a kid, I mean, it's been years ago, had I think it was DuckTales. It was a little cartoon with Scrooge McDuck. And he was the richest duck in the world. I don't know how much money a duck has to have. He's got to have more than one bill, I guess. But the richest duck in the world, but he spent his entire life stressed out and worried that somebody was going to steal his money or that some other duck, I can't remember the other duck's name, was going to get richer than him. And he spent his whole life, that sounds like a pretty miserable existence to me. I mean, Solomon said it. Lord, don't grant me so many riches that I forget you. But don't give me so much poverty that I am tempted to steal either. Give me enough to get by. But we many times may forget that. Having some wealth, having some possessions is not a sinful thing. but worshiping it or depending on it, putting our trust in it. So we say, well, I'd never worship this thing. But how much trust do we put in those things? Oh, I know we're not bowing down to it or praying to it or offering incense to it. But how much do we actually trust that money, those possessions? Because putting our trust in those things is what really gets us into trouble. And that's what God's really warning us about, these dangers. From the scripture that was read, Tim read for us a while ago, take care lest your heart be deceived and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. It's who you put your trust in, who's going to protect you, who's going to take care of you, who's going to provide for you. Now a lot of times we trust ourselves, or we trust the money and the possessions, or we trust the government. None of those are the answer. Our trust must be in God. He's the only one who can provide all those things for us. The government wants to take that place. The government wants us to trust them to do it. Maybe somebody else in our life wants us to trust them to be that person who's going to take care of them and provide for them and protect them and all those. But the fact of the matter is only God can do that. And we need to get that truth internalized and watch out for those times when we start to trust in our riches. Proverbs tells us, riches, money, grows wings and flies away. There's been a lot of talk recently about inflation. How big your bank account isn't going to matter if inflation got crazy like it did in the Weimar Republic of Germany, or like it has in some places. Zimbabwe, it got to the point where it was like $1 million for one egg. In the Weimar Republic of Germany, I believe it was, I'm trying to remember that, I was listening to that just yesterday, in one of the places where inflation had gotten so out of control, it got so bad that people burned the money instead of firewood or coal because the money was easier to get and cheaper than the wood or the coal. They burned that to keep them warm. If you put your trust in that money, what do you do when the money doesn't mean anything anymore? When that money's worthless, then what? Another lie that we tell ourselves about the way things work is that we tell ourselves that we can receive good gifts without God. We get so confused. We don't understand this truth that James teaches us in James 1, verses 13 through 17. He says, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he's lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it's conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change." Now that doesn't mean that God personally gave you every gift that you've ever gotten, but that's where it came from. If someone gave you $100 when you were down and out and needed that $100, yes, that person gave it to you, but it came from God. He gives every good gift and every perfect gift. It's His giving nature and us being made in His image that makes some of us, not everybody, because there are some Scrooges out there, but it makes some of us givers to others. But it's because of Him. He gave first. He loved first. And when we give gifts to others, it's only because we are replicating in our lives what God has already done. But we think sometimes, I don't need God. I can, these good things are happening to me. These good gifts are, I'm getting all these good things, and I didn't need God to get them. And that's not true. All of the good gifts. Now, the other problem is some people confuse what's a good gift and what's not. I was listening to an interview of a man who had been a drug addict, but he had gotten off of the drugs and then had a family. And his own children then wound up getting caught up in drugs. And he was telling about how he thought he was being good to his son. And his daughter just jumped all over him about it. After she had gotten clean from the drugs, and she saw him give his son, just gave him $100. Just being a good dad, right? Just give my son $100. Problem was his son was a drug addict, and that $100 was drug money. And that's what his daughter, she said, do you know what he can do with it? Why did you give him that? You gave him that money. What's he going to do with that? Don't give him that. She knew because she'd been there. She'd been the one he gave $100 to, and then she went out and bought drugs with it. She knew it had been like that. And he should have known too from his own history. But sometimes parental love blinds us to some of the harm that we may do with these things. Not all gifts are good gifts, even though they may look like good gifts. People may think they're good gifts, but not all of them are good. Some of them cause harm. And those gifts are not good. But the good and perfect gifts, every single one of them, comes from God. But another lie that we tell ourselves, and Satan really tries to push this one on us. When we're having trouble, when we feel abandoned, and I think the Footprints poem tells that story better probably than any other, where the man has the dream and he sees the footprints on the beach, and there are two sets of footprints, and then for a while there's only one set, and he can't figure that out. And God answers his confusion, explaining to them, or Jesus does, as the story goes, that it was during that time, it was like, that was the hardest time of my life, and then that's when you abandoned me. And there's only one set of footprints there. I had to walk that by myself, and that was the toughest time. And he's reminded, no, that was the time I was carrying you. But the lie still gets told and still believed so many times that God doesn't seem to be around when you really need him. Where's God? That's what they called out to Jesus as he was hanging on the cross. Where's your help now? Who's going to save you now? The prophecy, as David had mentioned in the Psalms, as he talked about, and then of course that's carried over to a description of Jesus, what David was going through as that type of Christ. I know y'all been talking about shadows and types and antitypes and things in the Sunday morning class. And David talked about, how all his bones were sticking out, and my God, why have you forsaken me? And all of these things that he felt like he was alone, like God wasn't there. And Jesus experienced that feeling on the cross as well. And it's a common thing. But when we feel that, when we're going through that tough time and we're wondering, where is God? We must remember he's there. He's carrying us. He's protecting us. He hasn't abandoned us. Now, there are times when we abandon him, go off walking on our own. And I like the update to that Footprints poem where he's like, yeah, there we were walking together, and there's the footprint. That's where I was carrying you. And then you see those two long, that's where I had to drag you because you didn't want to go. And that kind of, it just, but sometimes the expectations we have, we think God's just going to solve every problem just like that. Something's wrong. God, fix it right now. Kind of like the old timey, where they had the bell, they ring the bell, and the servants come running, right? Doesn't work that way. God is not our servant. We're his. He will help us in his own good time, in the way he sees fit, in a way that will bring glory to him. We were talking in the boys' class just this morning about Acts chapter 5 and how the apostles, Peter and John particularly, were beaten, and how after they were beaten and then released and told not to talk about Jesus anymore, they went out rejoicing because they were counted worthy. Did God protect them from getting beaten? No. Did he protect them from getting arrested and thrown in prison? No. Sometimes we have expectations of God that are unrealistic. And the last thing that we want to consider this morning is the idea that truth is relative. That I can have my truth and you can have your truth, or that truth changes from generation to generation. And the things, back there in the Bible times, those guys, they wrote all those things, but that was a patriarchal society, and we're becoming enlightened now. We're moving beyond all that stuff, and so we're going to change the rules, and the truth is going to change along with. That is not the way truth works. If it changes, then it was not ever really truth. Now, there are facts, there are events, there are things that happen that change from day to day. This week I'm wearing a blue shirt. Last week I was wearing some other color shirt. Those things change. But the truth does not change. Now, there are truths. Just because 3 plus 5 equals 8 doesn't mean that 4 plus 4 can't equal 8. Both of those can be truths at the same time. 4 plus 4 can equal 8. 3 plus 5 can equal 8. At the same time, 12 minus 4 can equal 8. I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of things like that. And so there are a lot of times people get confused because they see a truth, but they get to it a different way than somebody else did. And they think, that means truth is relative. Truth changes. No, truth doesn't change. How you came to the truth may be different. How you learned the truth might be that your perspective was different than somebody else's. But the truth is still the truth. There are these things that are universally true for all time. Those are truths. And those are the things that we can't ignore and can't let go of. John 8:32, Jesus didn't say, some kind of truth might, maybe if you believe it, set you free. He said, you will know the truth. Not a truth, not a version of the truth, not something kind of truthish. You will know the truth, and it will set you free. We got far too many who are pushing this narrative that truth can change, and that what was true for the first century Christians isn't true for us today in America. Cultural things change, yes, absolutely. Do societies change? Yes. Are there other things? There are a lot of things that change. Some people say the only constant is change. Change happens all over the world every day. But truths remain the same. And one of the biggest problems that we have with this, and the reason that we have this problem, is because we sometimes confuse things like mores and morals. Mores are just socially acceptable behaviors. Morals are based on eternal truths from God. And so when people see the mores of a society changing, they think, oh, well, the morals can change too. No. I mean, people may change those and not live by those morals anymore, but the morals themselves don't change. So I'll give you an example of what we're talking about here. There are some things that God created. We're talking about the way God created this world outward. God made them male and female. And he said, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. He said that's the way it works. That's the moral thing. Not a man will leave his father and mother and run around with 15 different women, or that he'll leave his father and mother and find a man. He said this is the way one man leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his wife. That's it. That was the moral standard that God set. That's the eternal truth of how God created human beings to be in their sexual relationship. Now, on the other hand, let's talk about mores for a minute. Here in the United States, there used to be a lot of social rules, like men don't wear hats inside, like women don't wear pants, like, and you can go on down the list. And a lot of those, used to be, men wore wigs, right? The powdered wigs from the time of the Constitution, right? See all those pictures of those guys in those old white powdery wigs, except for Benjamin Franklin. He was the only one that was like, I'm not wearing a wig. What's wrong with y'all? But, that's the way we look. Those things were social standards, social norms. They change. Women wear pants now. Men often wear hats indoors. Some people still get upset about both of those two things. But the fact is, societal rules can change because they're just rules society made up anyway. In Jesus' day, men wore robes. I kind of like to go back to that. Pants can be kind of uncomfortable. Go back to the robes. But these things change. Styles and all these things. But the eternal truth doesn't change. And we need to learn that. We need to recognize that. One eternal truth that we need to remember is sin plus time does not equal forgiveness. If you have sin in your life this morning and you have not had it forgiven by Jesus Christ, you've not had his blood cleanse you of your sins, you need to do that. If you've not become a Christian by believing in Jesus Christ as the Son of God and repenting of your sins, confessing him as the Christ and being baptized to wash your sins away, you can do that this morning. If you're here and you are a Christian, but you have sin in your life that you've never taken that back to God and you've never repented of that and you've never confessed that to him, it doesn't matter if it's been a week or a month or 10 years. If you haven't gotten right with God, get right with God. Sin plus time doesn't equal forgiveness. Only Jesus can do that. If you're here and you have a need to respond for any reason, please do so as we stand and sing.